Happy New Year, everyone. Again, so grateful to be together. We so missed having people celebrating the new year with us last year, and so grateful for all of you who have come to be here in the Berman Reuben this morning, those who are joining Rabbi Sorokin and Michael Leslie in the Offit, and also so many who are joining us online this morning. You know, 10 days from now, it will be Yom Kippur. Rabbis on Rosh Hashanah are always looking forward to Yom Kippur. And that morning we read the great text, one of the great texts of the entire Bible, I think, comes from the 57th chapter of the prophet Isaiah. And we find there the following verse, Shalom, shalom l'rachoku l'karov. Welcome, welcome to those both far and near. Those both far and near. And I cannot think of a better way to welcome all of you on this Rosh Hashanah, joining together here literally near and far, those gathered physically here on the Bethel campus this morning, and those who are joining us again watching the services online. Welcome to you all. And I feel that we do come together, we join together as one Kehillah Kadoshah, this sense of sacred community, connected one to the other, as brothers and sisters and as Jews, and we come together to greet a new year and also to ask for God's blessings in our lives. And it is community that I would like to spend some time thinking with you about this morning, and specifically, you probably won't be surprised, Jewish community. And what does Jewish community mean, and where are we in terms of the Jewish community that we're trying to shape, that we're trying to form? In 2 years' time, Bethel will be celebrating its 75th anniversary. Bethel was founded 1948, same year as the State of Israel. And in the course of our congregation's existence, what Jewish community means has changed dramatically. So think 75 years ago. What did Jewish community mean 75 years ago? Generally, it meant that you married a Jew. Generally, it meant that you were Jewishly knowledgeable 75 years ago if you were part of Jewish community. Most of the time, 75 years ago, being part of Jewish community meant also belonging to a synagogue, and not just belonging, coming to shul. That was a regular part of your life. It often meant keeping a kosher home, or at least in the home that you lived in. There was a sense of Shabbos, there was a sense of Yontif. Candles were lit on Friday night. And here in Baltimore, of course, 75 years ago, to a certain extent today as well, but for sure 75 years ago, it meant if you were part of Jewish community, that on Friday nights you gathered with the generations of your family at the Shabbos dinner table, and very probably also on Sunday afternoons you gathered with the generations of your family on family circle gathering. 75 years later, the Jewish landscape is vastly, vastly different. Today, in the non-Orthodox community, which is our community, the non-Orthodox community, 6 out of every 10 Jews marry someone who's not Jewish. So the intermarriage rate is now at 60% in the non-Orthodox community. Across the country, you don't even get a sense of this in Baltimore, a little bit, but not in the same way, but across the country, synagogues are closing their doors. Hebrew schools are struggling all over the country. Fewer and fewer students are coming to Hebrew school today, and those students who do come spend less and less time studying Hebrew language and Jewish history. So Jewish community today is threatened, and when Jewish community is threatened, Jewish continuity is threatened as well. They're threatened by lack of knowledge, they're threatened by lack of connection, threatened by lack of commitment, and honestly and frankly, sometimes threatened just simply by lack of caring. People just don't care in the same way anymore. But perhaps the greatest threat to Jewish community today is the secularization of Jewish life and Jewish identity. Secular Jews are Jews who identify in some way as being Jewish. They identify maybe ethnically or culturally as being Jewish. They might identify ethically or morally as being Jewish, but they do not identify religiously as being Jewish, not in any way. Now, of course, we're Jews, and so what that means is that we associate everything with food, right? That's what Jews do. Everything you associate with food. And so we have come up in the Jewish community with a term for the secular Jew. And we call the secular Jew, anybody know? The lox and bagel Jew. The lox and bagel Jew. That's the term that's now used in the professional Jewish community. So how prevalent are secular Jews today? How prevalent are secular Jews? We have recent information. There was a Pew study, these regular Pew studies, and the most recent one just published a few months ago, came out in May of 21, and it shows that the secular Jew is the most rapidly growing segment of the American Jewish community today. Only 21% of Jews in America today, only 21% of Jews in America today say that religion is important to them. Now, in the United States as a whole, if you ask the complete adult population in the United States, all adults, 56% say they believe in God. It's a high number. I was surprised by that number, actually. 56% of United States adults say they believe in God, but in the Jewish population, 26%. 26%. And maybe the most disturbing statistic of all, if you go back 40 years, 45 years, 50 years, 70% of Jews, 50 years ago, 70% of Jews identified consciously as either conservative or Reformed Jews. Generally, that meant that they were connected to conservative and Reformed congregations. 70% is a big number. Today, that number is at 37%, and it is shrinking rapidly. Shrinking year by year. Now listen, I don't want to spoil your Rosh Hashanah, okay? Right? On that cheery note, as they say. So, you know, I hope you'll be able to go home, and I want to give you some good news that you can talk about with your family and your friends at your Rosh Hashanah lunch. And there was some good news in the study. First of all, this was astonishing to me. The vast majority of American Jews say that caring about Israel is essential to their Jewish identity. Caring about Israel is essential to their 82%. 82%. That is a high number. It's a wonderful number for Israel, and it speaks volumes about the connection between Israel and the American Jewish community. And Jews also continue to identify culturally as Jewish, even if they don't identify religiously as Jewish. So what does that mean, to identify culturally as Jewish? What it means is Jews are traveling, and if there's a Jewish historical site, they'll go. They'll go and they'll see what it's all about. If they're watching TV shows, they often are watching TV shows that have Jewish themes and Jewish characters. Anyone heard of Shtisel, right? Raise your hand if you've watched Shtisel. That's amazing. How about, maybe more to the point, unorthodox? Oi, okay, see? Jews follow Jewish news, even if they're not religious. They say they follow Jewish news, they want to know what's going on in the Jewish world, they want to know what's going on in Israel, and absolutely, Jews eat Jewish food, okay? 72% report that the cooking and eating of Jewish food is something they engage in regularly. Thank God for brisket, okay? Which we had last night, by the way. It was delicious brisket that Becky made last night. So when you look out at the American Jewish landscape, you see that we are still committed to being Jewish, at least in terms of our cultural identity, sort of how we think of ourselves culturally. But most of us are not religiously Jewish anymore, or at least we are less and less and less so. And that begs a question, which is, I think, one of the most important questions in the Jewish world today. Can a diaspora Jewish community that is culturally oriented but not religious, in other words, a Jewish community that exists in the diaspora that is essentially a secular community, can that community sustain itself? Can that community survive? I mean, I like lox and bagels. I do. I probably like lox and bagels as much, if not more, than the next person. But if our community consists of lox and bagel Jews, of secular Jews who don't believe in God, who never set foot in a synagogue, who do nothing religious in their homes, what's that community going to look like in 50 years? Will it be Jewish at all, a community like that? Will it be Jewish in any way that our Bubbies and Zadies would have been able to recognize? Now, it has to be said, full transparency, we are not by any means the first generation to ask these questions. The Jews have been asking these questions for a long, long time, at least going back 100 years. And some of the great Jewish thinkers of the 20th century, some of the great modern Jewish thinkers, have asked these questions and have offered answers to these questions. Martin Buber, and Herman Cohen, and Mordechai Kaplan, and Joseph Soloveitchik, and Abraham Joshua Heschel, and the list could go on and on. It's a veritable, virtual who is who of 20th century Jewish thinkers. And each of these thinkers looked at these questions, thought about them, and proposed a different solution to the challenge of living a meaningful Jewish life in the modern age. For Martin Buber, the answer was Zionism and a kind of ethnic national Jewish identity. Herman Cohen, born in Germany, mid-late 1800s, and he argued for a kind of sort of like a rational ethical monotheism. He thought that if we could create that, that would keep Jews connected, bring them back into the fold. Mordechai Kaplan famously saw Judaism not as a religion, said Judaism, no, it's not a religion. He wrote his famous book, Judaism as a civilization. Judaism is a civilization, and he thought if we could think about Judaism in that way, then Jews will stay connected to Jewish life. For Soloveitchik, it was a doubling down on the idea that you commit to living a halachic Jewish life, a Jewish life based on the legal system, on Jewish law, and that will create Jewish community and keep it meaningful for people. And Heschel came along, Abraham Heschel, and he rejected Cohen's rationalism, and he rejected, to a certain extent, Soloveitchik's halachic approach, and he said, no, what you need in Jewish community today, you need feeling, you need sensitivity, and you need spirit. And if you can create those things, then the modern Jew will come back to the synagogue and will come back to religious life. And of course, there are institutional answers to these questions as well. Answers, in other words, not coming from a philosophical approach of a thinker, but from an institution that's created in the context of the community itself. The federation system is one answer. The synagogue is another answer to that question. Jewish camping and the day school movement are also answers to this question. And each of these pieces has, in fact, played an important role in shaping modern Jewish life. Without Mordechai Kaplan's idea of Judaism as a civilization, we wouldn't have JCCs. They wouldn't even exist. And we would not have the kind of robust adult education that you see here in synagogues all over the country, and you certainly see here at Beth El in the Rabbi Mark G. Loeb Center for Lifelong Learning. Without Abraham Joshua Heschel's intense focus on the world of the spirit, the world of the neshama, without that, you wouldn't have Beth El Soul Center. It wouldn't exist. It wouldn't even be possible. And there can be no question that for more than half a century, it really was the synagogue that was the primary conveyor of Jewish traditions and Jewish values, and it was the central focus of Jewish life here in America. But for all of the efforts that have been put forth, for all of the philosophical answers that have been proposed by brilliant people, brilliant thinkers, and for all of the institutional blood, sweat, and tears, and yes, money that has been invested, here we are. And we are seriously wondering whether Jewish life in America can be preserved in any meaningful, recognizable way for the generations to come. We're okay right now. In 10 years, I don't know. 15 years, I really wonder. What is going to preserve Jewish life and what is going to save Judaism, not only as a culture, not only as TV shows and food, but as a great religious tradition? I don't know the answer to that question. But I also wonder if we're asking the wrong question. Because what we always ask is, what will save Judaism? What's going to save Judaism? And maybe what we need to ask is, who is going to save it? Not what, but who. And I can tell you one thing I do know for sure after 23 years in the rabbinate. Your rabbi is not going to save Judaism. But you know what? You might. You might. When I meet with couples in preparation for their wedding, at some point in my conversations with them, I always say something like this. I say, I hope you'll have children, because we need more Jews in the world. And then I say, I hope you'll make a Jewish home in which to raise those children. And then I say this to them, I need to now tell you something very important. I cannot make your children Jewish. I can help a little bit. Synagogue community can help a little bit. Hebrew school can help a little bit. But I can't make your children Jewish. Only you can do that. Because at a certain point, we have to acknowledge that Jewish continuity is not really dependent on institutions and philosophical approaches. Instead, Jewish continuity is dependent on the choices of individual Jews, each and every one of us. What you decide to do Jewishly in your own life, in the life of your family, in the life of your children and your grandchildren, the decisions and choices that you make, the Jewish behaviors that you engage in, at the end of the day, that is what will determine what is going to happen to the Jewish community in the United States for the next 25 years. So imagine for a moment this. Imagine if everyone in this room and everyone who is watching this service online this morning made it a point of pride to travel to Israel in the next 5 years. Say, we are going to go to Israel. It's the Jewish homeland. Either I've never been there or I haven't been there in 10 years. It's time for me to go. And imagine if the thousands of people who are engaged in this service made that a pledge and they did it. Imagine how much stronger and more vibrant and healthier and economically strong Israel would be. And imagine how much more connected we would feel to the Jewish homeland. Think if everyone in this room today pledged to add Jewish practice, just one new Jewish practice into their home life in the year to come. I don't know what it would be. Maybe it's putting a mezuzah up. If you don't have a mezuzah, by the way, if you need to put up a mezuzah, call me. I'll come to your home and help you put up a mezuzah. More than happy to do it. Maybe I'll end up being like Elijah, and I'll be at a lot of homes at the same time, but we'll work it out. Maybe it's lighting candles on Friday nights, if you don't do that. Maybe it's saying on Shabbos at Friday night for 2 hours or Saturday morning for 2 hours, I'm going to take that cell phone that I hold constantly, I never let go of, and I'm going to put it in a drawer and not look at it, and give myself some time to think about what it means to be a human and a Jew. But just think, if everyone chose one new Jewish practice to adopt in the new year, how much more Jewish their homes would feel and their hearts would be. Imagine if everyone in this room and everyone who's watching this service online, again, it's thousands of people, if all of these people said, this year, I'm going to come to shul for services 5 times, just 5, when I normally don't come. 5 times when I normally don't come. Imagine how much more meaningful you would find what you're doing right now is. Imagine how much more connected you would feel to your faith, and how much more comfortable you would be in your Judaism, and how much more familiar you would feel with the beautiful rituals of our prayer services. And think if everyone here this morning in the Berman Rubin Sanctuary and everyone watching the service at home today understood that it was their responsibility, not mine, not the Cantors, not Rabbi Sorokin's, not Dr. Bohr's, but their responsibility to teach their children and their grandchildren about the beauty and meaning of Jewish life and the spiritual riches of Jewish prayer and the triumphs and also the tragedies of Jewish history. Imagine all of that. Just for a moment, imagine all of that. And then realize that you not only want to do it, because I know you want to do it. I know you want to do it in your hearts and in your souls. Decide to do it. You can decide to do it. 2008, 13 years ago, Rabbi Loeb retired from Bethel, and there was a very memorable Shabbos morning service in the June of that year. It was his last service, conducting services as the senior rabbi. Cantor, I'm sure, remembers. And Rabbi Loeb gave a very powerful sermon that morning in which he reflected on his life in the rabbinate and his life as being the leader of the community for the 30 years that he served the congregation. And he concluded his sermon that morning with the following story. He said, "When I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. But I found it's hard to change the world. So I figured, draw it in a little bit. I tried to change my country. And when I found I couldn't change my country, I began to focus on my town, my community. But I realized I couldn't even change that. So I tried to change my family. Generally doesn't work out too well. But now that I'm an older man, I have realized the only thing I can change is myself. But I also recognize this. If I had started with myself long ago, I might have made a different impact on my family. And then maybe my family and I could have made a different impact on the community that we live in. And maybe that could have changed the country for the better. And who knows? Maybe that would have even changed the world. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur remind us that we can transform our own lives. And in so doing, we bring blessing on ourselves, yes, to our homes and our families, yes, to this Jewish community, to this congregation, yes, even to future generations of Jews, yes, and even to the world, yes. Shana Tovah.